Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd.World History and continuing on the series on the various different Celtic tribes of pre-Roman Britain. And today we are looking at probably the most well-known and famous of all the Celtic tribes, the Iceni, the original tribe from which Boudicca hailed. They lived in East Anglia and are famous for their uprising against Roman oppression. And before we get into the story, I should tell you this video is brought to you from my sponsor, Relentless Rebels, who are linked in the description below and we'll discuss later in the video. For now, like, share, subscribe, comment down below on anything that I inevitably do miss about the Iceni tribe, and bear in mind, as I've said before, and I think is in the description, I am not a historian, I'm just someone that has a great passion for history, but there are elements I will leave out because I'm planning to cover things in future videos in more detail, and particularly about locations when I can actually find the time to go out and get down to them myself. So this is a general view of the tribe, not it's as detailed as I can go into, but it's not massively super detailed. So if there is something else I missed that you think I should have kept in the video, or something perhaps you think I don't know, there are things, tell me in the comments below. Keep it civil, but I don't really care. If you want to be a jackass, go right ahead. You be you. With all that said, let's get into the video. Okay, so the Iceni were a tribe that certainly had its origins in Belgic culture. This is based on linguistic and certain cultural identifying markers, such as in grave goods and certain artistic things that they say they had in their culture and artifacts that have been found. Like many British tribal kingdoms, they heavily embraced what is broadly known as the Latin culture, the Latin art form. This is more a style. You see it in things like the Battersea shield that I've mentioned before. That sort of swirling patterns and colours is typical of Latin style, and the Iceni seem to embrace that. The exact time the Iceni as a people came into Britannia is unknown, but it's thought that the leaders of the tribe were certainly more Belgic than they were Britain, although that can be argued easily to go a different way. But generally speaking, they were believed to be a sort of early Celtic culture already living there, and then Belgic warriors or nobles came in and kind of took over and made things a little different and did things their own way, and you had the Iceni. Now skip forward, and I can't even say how far because we don't really know when that happened. It probably was around the first second century BC. You get Julius Caesar's invasion, and it should be noted that although the Iceni didn't exactly ally themselves with Julius Caesar at this time, they didn't really oppose him. They were also going by a slightly different name that I can't pronounce. I've actually tried multiple times and I can't do it. I just can't seem to get this one, so I'm going to put it on the screen. And this may have been what they were known as, which apparently I say apparently because again not a linguist, but apparently it translates as an early Proto-Celtic language of Belgic origin that means Great Iceni, indicating that the tribe was held in high regard, at least at this time period. Now, although they may not have directly aided Julius Caesar, they certainly didn't oppose him. They were enemies of the Cativaloni, and the Cativaloni were the main ones that opposed Julius Caesar. And they, as I said, they simply didn't stand in the way. They didn't help. Now, again, they didn't help the Romans either, as far as we know, but they certainly welcomed them a little more. Now, this is the first stirrings of what was a sort of very pro-Roman culture in the Iceni kingdom. And this would continue for the next few decades, all the way up to the Roman invasion of Emperor Claudius 100 years later, with the Iceni welcoming the Roman governor with open arms and not actually directly opposing. However, there is some evidence that not all the Iceni were quite as willing to accept this. See, the Iceni generally were enemies of the Cativaloni. The Cativaloni had invaded the invaded the Atrebates territory as well as that of other tribes, and when the Romans came, they came to defend some of these other tribes against the Cativaloni. Now, it might be the Cativaloni that caused the catalyst that started all of this, but without a united front, as I've said before, there was no chance that these tribes were really going to be able to oppose Rome. And on the civilian level, the sort of lower level of society, they might not really know the long-term ramifications for Roman conquest, but at the top, many of them must have done, and they simply either embraced it or they resisted it. And they made that choice, and the Iceni made the choice to work with the Romans. That was, as I said, until some of the nobles of the Iceni didn't particularly take too kindly to Roman rule. Particularly, they didn't support the then king who had done it, and they, although I don't know exactly what happened, because I've only read about this vaguely, I don't actually think anyone really knows. Basically, the Iceni were minting their own coins, and some of the nobles began to stamp their own coins out, and probably this was sort of as an element of rebellion against the current chieftain and the Romans. Now, it went away pretty quickly. The Romans stomped it out, as did the Iceni king. But a few years later, the Romans, who were still dealing with a lot of violent uprisings, well, say uprisings, direct invasions and conquests and lots of war with all the other tribes in the local area, again the Cativaloni and others, they decided a disarmament program was necessary. Now, the Iceni, although they'd never been a direct enemy, the Romans didn't want anything to happen. There was certainly a bit of unrest, so the Romans decided to take all their weapons off them. Now, to a Celt, that's pretty damn offensive. You ain't taking his sword, his shield, his axe. You ain't having it. And they went into a full rebellion on this. And the Romans had to put it down very savagely. At this point, the old king was replaced, and with a new king, the actual husband of Boudica, Prasutagus. Now, this man was very pro-Roman. He was a bit more of a player, and he was able to get the Romans back on side, smooch up to the governor, and try and basically keep everything going nice and civil. That was until he died, when we know what happened then, as I've done a video on it, which I hopefully will remember to link. He dies, and the Romans just turn the Iceni into a client kingdom, and then you get Boudica's rebellion in 60-61 AD, after she is flogged and her daughter is violated by the Roman soldiers. As, you know, Romans gotta do what Romans gotta do to maintain order and Roman way of life, of course. And that's more or less the Iceni in a nutshell. They basically were a very pro-Roman tribe that lived, unfortunately, long enough to regret that decision. Although there were some amongst them that were against it, they just were so hostile to the Cativaloni. They were kind of, yay, go Rome, flatten them, but then didn't think what was going to happen when the Romans were done dealing with the Cativaloni. And unfortunately, that's basically what happened. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on specific individuals and other events within the kingdom of the Iceni, as I am planning a couple of other videos about the Iceni, and particularly people like Prasutagus, who is worth his own video, and I'll cover some more like the first rebellion and things of that nature, and where it was defeated, what battle it was probably defeated at, things like that, which I'm going to do in another video that I'm hopefully going to be doing in the next week or so, as I'm going to try and sort of round off all the Iceni. The thing is, despite the fact that they're a relatively well-known tribe, we do know plenty about them, of course. We know plenty about their leaders. Interestingly, they actually were road builders, and I've said this before, the Romans are given credit for a lot of things they didn't do. Now, they made things better. There was a lot of bloodshed spilt in order to accomplish it, but the Romans did improve a lot of things. Roads were one of them. Roman roads are immensely superior to anything we had natively. However, that wasn't to say we didn't have them. And the Iceni, if you're not British, or even if you are and you're not particularly familiar with East Anglia, and I'll be honest, I've never been there, but I'm familiar with it enough to know what it's like. It's relatively flat. To someone from East Anglia, as I understand it, as I've heard it said by people from East Anglia, a small bump in the ground is like a mountain to them. The area is immensely flat. There's not much going on there in terms of geography. There aren't many landmarks you can really pick out that aren't man-made. the roads tend to be a little higher than surrounding areas. Now, back in the day, back when the Iceni were around, the fenlands were much more extensive and harder and more dangerous to traverse. Remember, back then we had bears and lynxes and wolves running around as well, not to mention the aurochs and various other now completely extinct species that made life a little more interesting. Now, they did build roads. Now, there have actually been several of them excavated in the last 30 years. Now, they were made of wood, and these were in some ways a causeway, but they did build them, and they did build quite impressive ones, and hopefully I have images of them, which I think I do have on my computer, so hopefully I'll remember to put them on. And these have been dug up over the years as evidence of deliberate road construction. Now, it might not be everyone's traditional idea of a road. Not many people think of a road as being timber, but effectively it's a big walkway or cartway moving through the fenlands to move people and goods from here and to there and back again. So it's a road. It's just not the idea of the Roman road. And so again, the Romans, they're given credit for doing things they didn't do. They did not introduce road building. They simply improved upon what was already here. And the Iceni are a good example of it. They didn't build much out of stone, I should point out, because mostly it's a less common material in East Anglia. Again, not non-existent, by no means, but having good usable stone in that area is less common. But there were plenty of trees, so most houses, the round houses the ancient Britons were known for living in, would have been the traditional timber or wattle and door, more likely the wattle and door with a thatched roof, which was the most common form. If you want to get stone built round houses, you've got to go Cornwall, Devon, Scotland, certainly up Scotland, particularly in the islands like Shetland, Orkneys. You get a lot of stone built houses up there, stone built houses. Things like wheelhouses. Wheelhouses are fascinating, but I don't want to go off on a tangent because they deserve their own video as a specific structure. And as I said, I'm going to do some more specialized videos on the Iceni, but that's them basically in a nutshell. They didn't really fight. The only thing they're really famous for is their rebellion, and that came about after they were basically kicked in the face by the Romans, and there was already a lot of simmering dislike and disdain for Roman rule. And Prasutagus, he'd always been so pro-Roman, he'd managed to keep his people under control, but after what happened to Boudica and her daughters, that was an offence to the Celts, and that's all they needed. Remember, their brothers in arms, in a sense, their cousin cultures were already at war with the Romans. It didn't take much to ignite that bomb, and the Romans really ignited it. I'd like to say they learned from that, but I don't really think they did. With that said, just going to mention my sponsor, Relentless Rebels, because I forgot to do it again earlier. They are linked in the description below. They do Viking style jewelry and other unique items that, if you go to their website and you find anything you do like, use the promo code NERD20 to get a 20% discount off any of your purchases. That's NERD20, all in capitals. And with that little promo out of the way, we're realistically at the end of the video on the Iceni, because a lot of the other things you learn about the Iceni aren't necessarily true. There's sometimes Victorian romanticized images. For example, Boudica is quite famous, particularly her statue down in London, for having large spikes on the wheels that stick straight out, and they were meant for cutting down enemy troops. Now, whether or not these actually existed, I have never been able to conclusively find any evidence that they did. Now, I have seen a practical reconstruction of an Iron Age British chariot, which was fitted with these sort of spikes, and they tested different designs and things of this nature. And I think it was Mike Loads, I believe he's called, the historical reenactor and weapons historian, who was one of the ones who was testing it, and he came to the conclusion that although, yeah, they're not going to cut someone's legs off, because obviously the blade is spinning, so the sharp edge is never always pointing forwards because it's on a wheel. It wasn't locked in place. That technology wasn't really there yet, so it wasn't like a sharp blade just constantly sticking out to each side. A corkscrew, maybe. but basically came to the conclusion that this thing was still moving very fast, and this was still a big, heavy chunk of sharp metal sticking out. Even if you weren't hit with the sharp edge, it was spinning quickly and would shred you. The sheer kinetic impact would break your legs, break your spear, break your shield. You weren't going to withstand it. No Roman armor or shield was actually going to withstand it. So actually, it was theoretically plausible, but was it a Victorian invention? Probably. I think it was. But you decide. Let me know in the comments below. And with all that said, if you made it to the end of this video, and this isn't the end of the video, as I said, because I want to do more specialist videos on the Iceni rather than one long broad topic on them. Tell me in the comments below, and also mention anything about the Iceni you'd like me to more extensively elaborate on, and I'll try and add it to my list. As I said, I'm going to try and do a few Iceni videos over the next few weeks into the mix. And if you did make it all the way to the end, again, thank you for watching, and bye bye.